older sister looked me dead in the eye across the conference room table and said, "By Friday, you won't have a license left to practice." My parents sat on either side of her, nodding slowly, and my mother added, almost gently, "We just want you to understand what happens when you go against this family." I didn't respond. I kept my hands flat on the table, breathed through my nose, and thought about everything I had spent 7 years building. I thought about my patients. I thought about the morning 3 weeks earlier, when the certified letter arrived at my clinic with the state medical board's seal on the envelope, and I thought about what my supervising physician, Dr. Okonkwo, had told me when I called her in a panic, "Don't say a word to anyone until we know exactly what they filed." The hearing room at the Texas Medical Board offices in Austin was smaller than I expected, for something that felt so enormous. Fluorescent lights, a long folding table, 5 board members with printed binders in front of them. My attorney, Celeste Varga, sat beside me with a yellow legal pad covered in her handwriting. Across the room, my sister's attorney had set up a neat row of folders. My sister sat behind him with her arms crossed, wearing the same expression she'd had since we were teenagers. That particular blend of confidence and contempt she reserved for moments when she thought she'd already won. "My name is Adrienne Cho. I'm 32 years old. I finished my residency at 30 and opened a small outpatient physical therapy clinic in San Antonio 18 months later. I named it Steadfast Rehabilitation. It wasn't glamorous. It was a converted storefront near the medical district, with 4 treatment rooms, 2 full-time therapists besides myself, and a front desk coordinator named Lou who kept everything running. We took Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance. We specialized in post-surgical recovery and chronic pain management for working adults who couldn't afford to be sidelined. It was exactly what I had always wanted to build. My sister Genevieve had a different kind of practice. She ran a boutique wellness center in the Hill Country, the kind with herbal consultations and curated supplement packages and a waiting room that smelled like eucalyptus. She had a master's in health administration and a talent for marketing that I genuinely respected, even when she used it in ways I found questionable. We had never been close, not the way people picture sisters. There was always a gap between us that widened every time our parents compared us at the dinner table, which was often. Growing up in our house in Austin, success was measured by visibility, by who recognized your name at church, by what your business card said, by whether the right people invited you to the right events. My parents ran a medical billing and consulting firm that had serviced local clinics for 30 years. They understood healthcare as a business better than almost anyone, and they had strong opinions about how their daughters should navigate it. Genevieve fit their model perfectly. She knew how to package herself, how to walk into a room and command it. She joined the local Chamber of Commerce, got featured in lifestyle magazines, built a brand. My parents beamed every time someone mentioned her name. I was the one who read research papers on evenings and weekends, the one who wanted to talk about evidence-based outcomes at family dinners, the one who chose a career focused on people who were often invisible in the wellness conversation. The working-class patients, the elderly, the ones fighting insurance companies for every covered session. I still remember a Sunday dinner about 4 years ago when I told the family I was going to open my own clinic in San Antonio rather than joining the wellness center with Genevieve. The table went quiet in a particular way. My father set his fork down carefully. My mother looked at Genevieve before she looked at me. Genevieve just tilted her head and said, "That's a tough market, Adrienne. Those patient populations are high risk. You sure you can sustain that?" My father nodded. "There's no margin in Medicare patients, you know that. Come work with your sister, build something together that actually has growth potential." I told them I appreciated the concern and that I was moving forward with my plan. My mother said something about how I always had to do things the hard way. Genevieve said nothing else, just reached for the bread basket with a small smile that said she'd already filed the conversation away somewhere useful. I didn't know then that she had. I didn't know that what I had interpreted as a family difference of opinion was actually the beginning of something much more deliberate. The complaint that landed at the Texas Medical Board alleged that I had been billing insurance carriers for services not rendered. Specifically, that between 8 and 14 patients per month over a 6-month period had been billed for full 45-minute therapy sessions that my clinic's own intake records showed had lasted under 20 minutes. The complaint included internal documentation, patient scheduling logs, therapist notes, billing summaries that were specific, detailed, and accurate enough to have come from someone with direct access to our clinic management software. When Celeste and I sat down with the full complaint the day after it arrived, she underlined a row of dates in red pen. "These intake logs," she said. "Who outside your clinic has access to your clinic management system?" I went through it in my head. My 2 therapists, Lou at the front desk, my billing contractor, a company called Meridian Practice Solutions that handled claim submissions, and one other person, my sister, who had approached me 8 months earlier about a potential operational partnership, and whom I had, briefly and against my better instincts, given a guest login to review our scheduling infrastructure as part of those exploratory conversations. Conversations that had gone nowhere when I declined to merge with her wellness center. Celeste looked at me for a long moment. "When did you revoke that access?" I pulled out my phone and checked the date in my email thread. 6 months ago, I said. Right after I told her I wasn't moving forward with any partnership. She wrote something on her legal pad. So the complaint period begins right after her access was revoked. The weight of that landed all at once. What I hadn't told anyone yet, what I didn't even fully understand until Celeste and I started pulling records, was that my clinic was not failing. The opposite was true. Steadfast Rehabilitation had just been selected as a participating provider in a regional healthcare initiative run by the San Antonio Metro Health Authority, a 3-year contract providing physical therapy services to underserved communities across 4 zip codes. It was the kind of contract that small independent clinics rarely won against hospital systems. It meant guaranteed patient volume, grant-eligible status, and a level of institutional recognition that made us suddenly very visible, and, I realized now, suddenly very threatening to anyone who had spent years dismissing what I was building. Celeste moved fast. She filed a motion requesting a 60-day delay in any preliminary findings while we compiled our defense. Then she started on discovery, requesting records of any correspondence Genevieve or her business entities had with the complainant filing, pulling logs of every access event in our clinic management system, and subpoenaing Meridian Practice Solutions for their billing submission records against the original session notes. Meanwhile, I kept the clinic running. I told Lou there was a regulatory review in progress and that everything was fine. I told my therapist the same. I answered patient calls, reviewed treatment plans, attended the Metro Health Authority onboarding meetings with a legal matter sitting like a stone in my chest. Sleep became something that happened in pieces. 2 weeks in, I noticed something. My billing coordinator at Meridian, a man named Stu, had been unusually slow in returning my calls. When I finally reached him, he mentioned offhandedly that someone from a health compliance consulting group had reached out to him in the past few months, asking general questions about billing practices in outpatient therapy settings. He couldn't remember the name of the firm. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. I told Celeste that evening. "That's not a coincidence," she said. She wasn't done. On her recommendation, I introduced a controlled piece of information into a limited conversation with my billing contractor, a detail about a planned software migration that I had not discussed anywhere in writing, not in emails, not in documentation, not in any notes Meridian would have had access to. I mentioned it casually in a call with Stu and 2 people from his team. I did not mention it to anyone else. 4 days later, Genevieve's attorney filed a supplemental brief with the medical board referencing concerns about our pending transition to new billing infrastructure as an additional risk factor for record-keeping inconsistency. There it was. Celeste pulled the submission timestamp, cross-referenced it with the call log, and built the exhibit that afternoon. The phrase was not generic. It was specific enough, appearing only 4 days after a conversation with people at Meridian Practice Solutions, that there was no explanation other than a direct pipeline between my billing contractor and the opposing party. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted and sick, and grateful that Celeste was as methodical as she was. We organized everything carefully: call recordings, access logs, the timeline from the guest login period, the Meridian correspondence thread, the billing migration exhibit. We prepared affidavits from my therapists confirming normal session lengths. We prepared a financial summary showing uninterrupted and fully compliant billing histories across the contested period, cross-referenced with our electronic health record timestamps, which logged session start and end times automatically. The morning of the hearing, I drove to Austin before sunrise. Celeste met me in the parking garage, and we went through the presentation one more time over coffee in the lobby. She was calm in the way that experienced attorneys sometimes are, not dismissive of the stakes but settled inside them. The board members filed in at 9. My parents arrived shortly after and sat in the observer section with Genevieve. My mother had dressed for the occasion. My father's face was unreadable. Genevieve wore a charcoal blazer and looked, as always, like she was in the right room at exactly the right time. Genevieve's attorney opened with a polished summary of the complaint, the alleged billing discrepancies, the internal records, the pattern he characterized as systemic and deliberate. He was good. He made it sound both reasonable and damning without overstating. 2 board members took notes. One of the others, a woman near the end of the table, kept her eyes on the documents rather than on him, which I noticed. When he finished, the board chair, a physician named Dr. Elaine Marsh, looked down at her materials and then directly at me. "Ms. Cho," she said, "before we proceed to the defense presentation, I want to ask about something in the pre-filed record that the board reviewed yesterday afternoon." The room got very quiet. "Your clinic, Steadfast Rehabilitation, is currently a contracted provider in the San Antonio Metro Health Authority Community Access Initiative, correct?" Genevieve's attorney straightened slightly in his chair. "Yes," I said. "We were awarded the contract 7 months ago following a competitive bid process. We began onboarding patients in January." Dr. Marsh nodded and looked at Genevieve's attorney. "Counsel, the complaint characterizes Steadfast Rehabilitation as an operation with systemic compliance failures and no reliable administrative infrastructure. The Metro Health Authority completed a credentialing audit of this clinic as part of their contracting process 4 months ago. That audit is part of the pre-filed record. It found no billing discrepancies, full documentation compliance, and rated the clinic's administrative processes as exceeding standards for facilities of its size." She paused. "Can you explain how a clinic with the systemic failures you've described passed a rigorous government credentialing audit 4 months before this complaint was filed?" Genevieve's attorney opened his mouth, closed it, then said, carefully, that their information suggested the audit may not have captured the full scope of the issues in question. Dr. Marsh looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "That's not an answer." Celeste rose. She laid out our case in exactly the order we had prepared. First, the access log timeline, Genevieve's guest login, its revocation, and the complaint period beginning immediately after. Second, the billing audit from Metro Health, already in evidence. Third, the electronic health records with automatic session timestamps directly contradicting the scheduling log cited in the complaint. Fourth, the Meridian pipeline, the billing migration detail, the call log, the filing timestamp. Fifth, the financial records showing the Ellis Group, which was Genevieve's parent business entity, had filed for a significant line of credit extension in the same month the Metro Health contract was announced, a contract that would have gone to Genevieve's organization if Steadfast Rehabilitation had been disqualified. That last point landed differently than anything else. A board member who hadn't reacted to anything looked up sharply. My father shifted in his seat. My mother stopped watching the room and looked at her hands. Genevieve's expression, for the first time all morning, flickered. Celeste finished without flourish and sat down. In the back corner of the observer section, Dr. Okonkwo sat quietly in a charcoal gray blazer, her hands folded in her lap. She had driven from San Antonio that morning without my asking. When I had called her in a panic weeks earlier, she had listened to everything and then said, "You built something real, Adrienne. Real things hold up." Seeing her there steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. Dr. Marsh conferred briefly with the other board members, then she looked at the room. The board's findings were delivered in writing 2 weeks later, but Dr. Marsh summarized the direction clearly that morning. The complaint was found to lack evidentiary support. The billing records cited were inconsistent with the clinic's electronic health record data, which constituted the legally operative documentation. The complaint was dismissed. Additionally, the board referred the matter of the original complaint's sourcing, specifically the use of credentialed system access and potential involvement of third-party billing personnel, to the Texas Attorney General's office for review of possible fraudulent filing and unauthorized computer access under Texas Penal Code Chapter 33. Genevieve's attorney gathered his folders without speaking. Genevieve stood and left without looking at me. My parents followed her out. My mother paused at the door for one moment and glanced back, but I couldn't read her expression and I didn't try. What followed over the next several months was slow and, in some ways, harder to watch than the complaint itself had been. The Attorney General's office opened an investigation. Stu at Meridian Practice Solutions was terminated after his employer's own internal review found evidence of unauthorized information sharing with external parties. Genevieve's Wellness Center faced its own licensing scrutiny when the investigation revealed that the health compliance consulting group that had contacted Stu was a shell entity registered at the same address as Genevieve's business. She ultimately reached a settlement with the state that included a substantial fine, a 2-year compliance monitor, and the forfeiture of the Metro Health contract bid she had submitted as a backup in case Steadfast was disqualified. She was not criminally charged. I want to say that didn't bother me, but it did, at least for a while. Celeste reminded me that civil and regulatory consequences are real consequences, and that what mattered for my clinic and my patients was that we were still standing. She was right. It still stung. My parents called me once, about a month after the hearing. My father spoke, and my mother was on the line, but said almost nothing. He told me that things had gotten out of hand, that Genevieve had been under a lot of pressure, that he hoped I understood the stress the family business had been under. I listened. When he finished, I told him I understood that they were his children equally, and that I needed them to understand that what had been done was not a family disagreement or a competitive misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to take away something I had built from nothing, using my own trust against me. I told him I needed time and that I would be in touch when I was ready. I haven't been ready yet. That's the honest truth. Dr. Okonkwo brought lunch to the clinic 3 days after the hearing. We sat in the break room with sandwiches, and she asked me how I was actually doing, which was different from asking how the case had gone. I told her I was tired in a way that felt cellular, like something deep in me needed to rest. She nodded and didn't try to fix it. "You know what I noticed about you, even back in residency?" she said. "You never needed anyone to validate what you were building. You just kept going." She was quiet for a moment. "That's rarer than people think." I thought about those words for a long time after she left. The Metro Health Community Access Program launched on schedule. We took on 47 new patients in the first month, many of them elderly, several of them veterans, a handful of teenagers recovering from sports injuries whose families couldn't have afforded private pay. Lou put a small cork board up in the break room where patients sometimes left notes. It filled up faster than I expected. I made a decision the month after the hearing that I'd been turning over in my mind since the whole ordeal began. I established a small fund through the clinic. We called it the Steadfast Access Fund. That covers co-pays and out-of-pocket costs for patients who would otherwise have to choose between physical therapy and something else they needed. We started with a modest amount, enough to support 10 to 15 patients per quarter. I put out a quiet word among colleagues that the fund existed. The response surprised me. There were things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had revoked that guest login the same day the partnership conversations ended, not a week later. I wish I had been less willing to extend good faith to someone whose history with me should have told me to be more careful. But I have tried not to carry that as self-blame, because the truth is that what happened was not the result of my naivety. It was the result of someone else's choice. I built steadfast rehabilitation because I believed that people who work hard, who get hurt, who are trying to get back to their lives, deserve access to real care delivered by people who actually pay attention to them. I still believe that. The hearing didn't change it. The attempt to take everything apart didn't change it. If anything, it clarified something I had always known but hadn't quite felt in my body until I sat in that Austin hearing room and watched the truth do exactly what truth does when you give it enough evidence to stand on. It doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be there. I keep coming back to the moment Dr. Okonkwo sat across from me in that break room with a sandwich she'd driven 2 hours to bring and asked how I was actually doing, not how the case had gone. Not what came next, how I was doing. I didn't have a clean answer. What I had was the truth, which was that I was tired in a way I hadn't felt before, and that I wasn't entirely sure what to do with the fact that the people who were supposed to be my family had looked at something I'd built with real care and decided the most useful thing they could do with it was take it apart. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it over these months, is that what happened was a kind of accounting, not punishment handed down from somewhere outside, just the natural weight of choices catching up with the people who made them. Genevieve made a choice to use access I gave her in good faith as a weapon. Stu at Meridian made a choice to pass information to people he shouldn't have trusted. My parents made a choice, over and over across years, to measure worth by visibility and reward the child who reflected their image back at them most cleanly. Those choices had consequences, not because the universe balances ledgers in some cosmic sense, but because most choices eventually produce the conditions they came from. You build a strategy on deception, and the deception eventually becomes the thing that exposes you. The billing migration detail I mentioned in that call, the one that appeared in their supplemental brief 4 days later, didn't trap Genevieve. It just revealed what was already there. What held on our side was something harder to see in the middle of it. It wasn't just the evidence, though the evidence mattered enormously. It was that the evidence existed because I had run the clinic honestly, from the beginning. Every session logged in real time. Every billing submission matched to documentation. The Metro Health credentialing audit came back clean because the clinic actually was clean. You can't manufacture that retroactively. The integrity was structural. It was in the systems, in the culture of the office, in the way Lou answered the phone, and the way my therapists wrote their notes. That's what held when someone tried to make it look like something else. I think about that a lot when I'm tempted to take shortcuts. When a billing code is ambiguous and the easier interpretation would benefit us. When a vendor relationship would go smoother if I just let something slide. What I learned from watching Celeste lay out those exhibits, the access logs, the timeline, the Meridian thread, is that honesty isn't a virtue that pays off emotionally in the moment. It pays off structurally, over time, in ways you can't always see until someone tests it. And the intelligence piece, the careful thinking, the controlled test with the Florida detail, the forensic analysis Celeste brought to every document, that wasn't cleverness for its own sake. It was in service of something true. Being smart matters when you're using it to find and surface what's real, not to construct something that only looks real. The persistence part I still feel in my body. The months of running the clinic normally while carrying a legal matter that could have ended it. Answering patient calls without letting any of it bleed through. Attending Metro Health on boarding while my chest felt like concrete. That didn't feel noble in the middle of it. It felt like necessity. But looking back, I think that steady showing up was the thing that mattered most to the people who depended on the clinic. They never knew what was happening. The care didn't waver. Dr. Okonkwo said I never needed anyone to validate what I was building. I'm still learning how to believe that fully. But I know this, Steadfast is still standing. The fund is growing. And the corkboard in the break room has 43 notes on it now. That's enough.